Suburban Commando! The science fiction epic, the timeless cinematic masterpiece that is beloved by fans worldwide. Okay, none of that is true, but it sure sounded good. Yes, Suburban Commando, the film that was intended to further catapult Hulk Hogan's film career. Well, it did just that, as in he was in numerous other films after this, but I don't think it went in the direction that he was hoping. Because you know, Mr. Nanny and Santa with Muscles aren't exactly what you would call action movie epics. But that's a different point altogether, and Suburban Commando was never meant to be the next blockbuster science fiction franchise that for some reason it's critiqued based on that expectation. And I think people are very unjustly hard on this movie. They have been and always will be, it seems. Yes, it's silly. It's goofy. It's not exactly what you would call, how you say, spellbinding cinema. But it's fun, and it's one of them popcorn movies, and I think people really didn't know what to expect with this one. It was released in theaters October 4th, 1991. It was made on a budget of $11 million, but only took in $8 million at the box office. So it didn't really have successful results, but it also really wasn't a flop. I mean, it could have been a lot worse. Hell, maybe it should have been a lot worse, but also maybe it should have been a lot better, and it's a little surprising that this didn't do all that well at the box office, considering Hulk Hogan's in it, and he's a pretty big name. He was and always will be. And I'm sure they assumed this movie would do well simply because he's in it, but it didn't. And I think that's because people just didn't want to see Hulk Hogan as a movie star. Or perhaps at one time they did, but after No Holds Barred, they realized that maybe that wasn't such a good idea. People wanted to see Hulk Hogan in the ring, but not in a movie. Some things just don't translate all that well. People enjoyed him in Rocky III, but that's because he wasn't the top star and was only in that movie for 5 minutes. In some cases, less is most certainly more, and this is one of those cases. So anyways, I hadn't seen this movie since I was 11 and had a very vague memory of it, so I decided to pop in my 1992 new Line Home Video VHS distribution, which, as you can see, is an ex-rental copy with a very big and clumsy clamshell. Seriously, this is the worst clamshell I've ever seen, but the tape works perfectly. It is pristine. And upon viewing this movie again for the first time in a long time, I gotta tell you, I really enjoyed it. Is it a bad movie? Oh, yeah. Is it the worst movie ever made? Oh, heavens no, far from it. Is it a good movie? Oh, heavens no, far from it. But it is precisely what it was meant to be, and it does it very well. It's just a silly movie. It's a fun watch. It was never meant to win any awards at Cannes. Now, to be honest, I gotta tell you that there were numerous times during this film where I was pretty ready for it to be over. But those times were few and far between. The majority is pretty entertaining, but there are parts that don't make a lot of sense. Like in the beginning, the main baddie gets his hand cut off by somebody's phone bill. I mean, what is that, a letter? What's going on here? And for not really any reason whatsoever, there's a street-performing mime doing his act in the middle of the night. And Christopher Lloyd's character's wife completely renovates his workshop into an apartment in less than 1 day. You know, stuff like that doesn't make any sense, but you learn not to ask too many questions because you're just wasting your time. But it's okay, there's some pretty good gags throughout the film. And yes, you heard me correctly, Christopher Lloyd is in this, and I think a lot of people forget about that. And perhaps he would love to as well. Which brings me to another point. The cast is pretty good in this. Not only is there Christopher Lloyd, but there's also Shelley Duvall, and Jack Elam's in this. You know, the actor who quite possibly has the greatest face in history. He plays a bit part in this, but really it could be the best character in the film. In this, he portrays a retired Army colonel and World War II veteran who spends his days sitting in the front lawn in an old Army Jeep with plants growing out of it, drinking heavily and watching The Neighbors. Like I said, he's not in the movie very long, but you certainly look forward to seeing him. And quite possibly what this film is most famous for is The Undertaker's in it. And in a pretty awesome role, I might add. He plays an intergalactic bounty hunter. And he certainly looks the part. He does a very good job in it. And again, he's not in the movie very much either, but still, you look forward to seeing him. And there's something I noticed that's pretty interesting. In the credits, they use his real name, which is Mark Calloway. Oh, sure, we all know his real name now, but back then, That was privileged information the WWF kept under lock and key. Yeah, he stayed in the Undertaker character pretty much 24/7. He wouldn't even talk to fans at meet and greets. There was a very select few who knew his real name. They kept Mark Calaway under wraps. He was locked into that character. It absorbed him, and he did it very well. He certainly lived the gimmick. So it's weird to me that at this time period, being 91, the genesis of that character, the very beginning of that persona, they would use his real name in the credits. It's weird because the WWF, and I know it's WWE now, whatever, was trying very hard to get this character over and really reinforce the fact that The Undertaker was an all-powerful, invincible, undead being. And once you find out that such a character's real name is Mark, there's really no going back from that. Not that there's anything wrong with the name Mark. Hell, it's a chapter in the Bible. But what it does is humanize a character you're working very hard to do the opposite for. So would it have made more sense to not use Mark Calaway in the credits and instead put The Undertaker in there? Well, actually, I think that would have been worse. Because in doing so, you're admitting that that guy was The Undertaker, a character who's now playing a character who's the opposite of The Undertaker. In short, The Undertaker portraying a character that's not The Undertaker, but is credited as The Undertaker portraying that character, is a little counterproductive. The Undertaker was such a strong character that he wouldn't be able to portray anybody else as The Undertaker. So using Mark Calaway in the credits was probably a better option, but I just would have went uncredited. I mean, come on, Andre the Giant did for that big monster at the end of Conan the Destroyer, so what's the big deal? You still get paid, and in Mark Calaway's case, you'd be preserving your Undertaker character's persona. Sure, we all knew it was The Undertaker at first glance, but the movie didn't have to admit that. It's plausible deniability. Hey, it works wonders in politics, and it works the same in entertainment. Perhaps you're asking yourself, what's the difference? Hulk Hogan is a wrestler portraying a character that isn't Hulk Hogan. What's the problem? Well, the Hulk Hogan wrestling persona was human. No matter how over the top or larger than life it was still human. The Undertaker, however, was supposed to be a ghoul from beyond the grave. So putting him in a movie as anyone other than The Undertaker wouldn't make any sense. Which brings me to a little side point here with No Holds Barred, where Hulk Hogan portrays a wrestler. That makes sense. Hulk Hogan is a wrestler, except in this movie, he doesn't portray Hulk Hogan. He portrays somebody called Rip, a fictional wrestler, which is okay, but then you're like, well, why wasn't he just Hulk Hogan? But then you're like, okay, well, perhaps they didn't want to blur the lines of reality, so it's a fictional wrestler. But then the villain in that movie, Zeus, is actually in a WWF storyline. Yeah, they brought the fictional wrestler bad guy over to reality to combat Hulk Hogan, who, as I had mentioned, doesn't portray Hulk Hogan in this fictional world where this fictional wrestling bad guy is from, and yet they bring him over to fight the real Hulk Hogan. That doesn't make any sense. I understand blurring the lines of reality for marketing's sakes, but geez, that would have made more sense if he played Hulk Hogan. So Hulk Hogan is Rip, who isn't real, but Zeus is Zeus, who isn't real, but is real. What? I remember when I was a kid, I still wasn't buying that, and it didn't make any more sense then than it does now. But anyways, back to Suburban Commando. You may think that Hulk Hogan and The Undertaker, or Mark Calaway, are the only professional wrestlers who act in this movie. Well, you're wrong! Another thing that the credits revealed to me was Brutus the Barber Beefcake is in this. As a stunt performer, but he's in this. I really didn't know that prior to this recent viewing, and I also didn't know that Hulk Hogan was an executive producer. Oh, that explains it. As a kid, I didn't really care about that. I didn't even know what an executive producer was, and I'll be damned if I still kind of don't. When this movie first came out, it was a pretty big deal to me. Hulk Hogan was in a sci-fi movie with blasters and spaceships and monsters and cool-looking armor and good enough special effects, and to that, I still sort of hold true today. Yeah, the special effects are okay, the costumes are pretty cool, the storyline's a little sloppy and awkward at times, but you look past that. And when this script was in its gestation period, it was originally called Urban Commando and was intended for Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. I really can't verify that, and I don't know for sure if it's entirely true, but that's what I heard. The story goes that the script was in existence for a while, and Schwarzenegger and DeVito decided to do twins instead, and the idea was flushed and put on the back burner until New Line picked it up several years later. And we got the epic cinematic masterpiece that we have today. Which brings me to my next point of interest, New Line Home Video, the distributor of this fine VHS. New Line Home Video was a predominant VHS distributor and one of the major names in the game. But for being such a major name in the game, they certainly took their sweet time time in participating. Yeah, they weren't really even a thing until 1990 when they got their start with their first VHS release, Misery. So they were latecomers in the age of VHS, but it didn't take them long to gain momentum. In 1991, they bought the home video rights to a shitload of titles belonging to Nelson Entertainment, who in turn bought their shit from Embassy Home Entertainment. And New Line Home Video even bought some of the home video licensing rights from Media Home Entertainment, like Nightmare on Elm Street. And there, throughout the history of VHS, New Line Home Video would remain at the top of the hill until they would eventually change their name to New Line Home Entertainment, and then in 2010 would be bought out by Warner Brothers. But that's post-VHS era stuff, and I don't really care about that, but it is interesting to find out what happened to them. Now, this 1992 New Line Home Video VHS distribution of Suburban Commando was, of course, the first distribution. But oddly enough, it wasn't the only one. And I say oddly enough because usually there's only one VHS distribution for movies like this. So 1992 saw two North American VHS releases for this movie. The one was from New Line Home Video, as you know. The other was from New Line's Canadian affiliate, Alliance Releasing Home Video. And the face value differences between these two distributions are certainly present. While the front of the sleeve is pretty much the same, the back of the sleeve is entirely different, not to mention the New Line Home Video logo is replaced with the Alliance logo, which is pretty obvious and to be expected. A New Line Home Video would release it again in 1995. Now you might be asking yourself, why on earth would you release this again on VHS so soon after its initial release? And I think the major question is, why would you release this again at all? Well, in 1995, New Line Home Video was bought out by Turner, and subsequently, all of New Line Home Video's library was re-released under the Turner Home Entertainment label. And Turner didn't exactly wipe New Line Home Video off the map. They did keep the namesake for recognition and marketing purposes. Basically, they pretty much just bought it, and all operations continued as normal. Now, other than the year on the sleeve, the differences between the 1995 and 1992 distributions aren't exactly staring you in the face, meaning they're not exactly easy to spot. In fact, the only difference between the two distributions is the Turner Home Entertainment logo, which is on the back of the sleeve and on the cassette itself. And that's just the face value difference. The tape itself is different too. Well, they just took out all the previews, you know, the fun stuff. The stuff that makes the 1992 distribution a lot of fun. There's previews for The Lawnmower Man and The Taking of Beverly Hills. Remember that movie? That's okay. Nobody does. But there's also a very fun and very dated introduction by Hulk Hogan himself, where he explains to you the WWF Wrestling Challenge game and a 900 number with a sweepstakes that I guarantee you nobody won. The gimmick was you called this 900 number, which cost you a fortune, by the way, and you would talk to Hulk Hogan himself. Well, that's what they said would happen, but I'm sure no one ever really talked to him. There's even a disclaimer at the bottom of the screen that explains, calls will only be received by Hulk Hogan while the line is available. That's a dodge, and that tells me Hulk Hogan ain't answering. But anyways, it's still fun, and it's really neat to see this kind of stuff nowadays, because I'm sure a lot of people forgot about this. Yeah, I love these sweepstakes promotions that are in the opening sequences of old VHS. It's so dated and so sealed in time and just so perfect as it is. And the best part, the only way to see it is on this particular VHS, or the 10 million videos that are uploaded on YouTube about it. But the original way is a little bit more romantic, and speaking of that, even I have a video uploaded about the opening sequence of the 1992 VHS distribution of Suburban Commando, if you wanted to check that out. In closing, this movie is sort of fun, but not very good. Would I watch it again? Probably not, or at least not anytime soon. Well, honestly, I'll probably never watch it again, because there's just not much to it. Even though it seems like there is, there isn't. And when this first came out, the fact that Hulk Hogan was in it was a pretty big deal. It offered a lot of sizzle, but not much steak. It takes a lot more than simply having Hulk Hogan in your movie to make it semi-watchable, and perhaps the novelty of that fact has long since worn off. If there even really was a novelty to begin with, I'm sure that was the intention. I mean, the gimmick of the whole movie is Hulk Hogan's in it. But it doesn't seem like people really even cared, because Hulk Hogan in a leading role isn't really a good thing. Oddly enough, he's the worst part of this movie, mainly because it just seems a little unnecessary to even have him in this movie at all. This movie doesn't need Hulk Hogan, but Hulk Hogan needed this movie, and that plan didn't really work, because really the character he plays, Shep Ramsey, that's a name for you, Could have been anybody. Shemp? No, Shep. He didn't really need to be in this film, but they used it for marquee power and for box office sales, and you saw how that worked out. Not very well. And as a matter of fact, not only is Hulk Hogan unnecessary in this movie, but pretty much all the characters are. With the exception of a very few characters, everybody was pretty much pointless, and Christopher Lloyd did not need to be in this movie. Once again, much like Hulk Hogan's character, his character could have been anybody. And speaking of that, his family was totally unnecessary. They're barely in the film. And his kids might as well not even exist. They have even less screen time. Christopher Lloyd's character, Charlie, is rather unnecessary. Pretty much does nothing for the story. It could have been anyone. Matter of fact, it could have been Ernest. Yeah, I'm saying that Suburban Commando should have been an Ernest movie. The thing is, the story wouldn't have needed to be altered that much to make that happen. Charlie and his family are very unnecessary. Just get rid of Charlie and swap him out for Ernest. There you go. At least it would justify the goofiness of this movie and make it valid and make it sort of watchable. But that's just armchair screenwriting. I'm sure that wouldn't have worked as well as it does in my head. Suburban Commando, on the surface, does have a lot going for it. They just needed to change a lot of stuff. For instance, making it a straight action movie would have been a good touch. The fact that it's a comedy just seems to fall flat a little bit and makes it ripe for its own parody. I mean, it is cool it doesn't take itself too seriously, because if it did, oh man, this would have been eaten alive. Also, they could have had it take place completely in space. Yeah, if it was an action-packed space opera, it might have been a little bit more palatable. Yeah, I say that, but it probably would turn out to be another space mutiny. And if it was a sci-fi space opera action-packed epic, Hulk Hogan could remain in that role, and that would solidify that character a little bit more. It would certainly make him more necessary, and for God's sakes, give him as few lines as possible. You'd have to change the title of the movie, but I think that could be done fairly easily, and the fact that it takes place on Earth, just for gag's sakes, I don't know, it just doesn't work out that well. Bottom line, Suburban Commando isn't a very good movie, but it tries, though not very hard. I mean, it's okay, it's not nearly as bad as people would have you believe. The special effects are alright, the villains are pretty cool, but everything else is sort of flat. So that about does it for today. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to hit subscribe. Take care out there, and I'll see you next time, only on Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship.
Tell your mom to keep practicing.